So we have this recording available for those who couldn't make it today. If you wanted to re-watch it, if you wanted to share it with your friends, it's available on our public-facing site. So welcome again to our amazing Florida-friendly landscaping series of webinars. We have Doris Heitzman here, who is the program manager, and I will let her take it away. Thanks, Doris.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, this is Doris Heitzman, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Manager. And I also have Melissa West here with me. She's working with me on the program, focusing on homeowners. My focus is more homeowner condominium association members. So yeah, great to have you here. Thank you all for joining us. So today, as Jane said, we will talk about easy yard maintenance for the smart gardener. Hence the word gardener. I'll get into that in a moment. And just before we get started, I'd like to introduce our partners here, which is the University of Florida, IFAS Extension, which is Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. And then we have Tampa Bay Water and Pinellas County are also partnering with us. And the program, as you know, is our program that we are teaching is Florida Friendly Landscaping. And today we'll talk about starting out with cultural landscaping practices. We'll touch on mowing, fertilization, pruning, watering, plant establishment, integrated pest management or IPM. And then we'll talk a little bit about mulch, composting, and recycling. And the reason being to get to a lower maintenance landscape that is more enjoyable and is also healthier for not only for us, but also for the environment. Before I jump into the program, I'd like to remind you, in case you haven't seen that yet, to try if you can are eligible for one of the Tampa Bay Water rebate programs. So if you're a Pinellas County utilities customer or within the city of St. Petersburg, receive your water from them, the city of St. Pete, but also the other counties here, Hillsborough County, Pasco County, and the cities of Newport Richey and Tampa. So if you're in either of these jurisdictions, see by using this link here on the right-hand side if you can get a rebate. And there are all kinds of rebates out there. And if it's just a new toilet that is low flow toilet, uses less water, that would be already a step forward to water conservation. So check it out. And we'll send out the link also as well with our resources sheet that we send after the program. Okay, back to Florida Friendly Landscaping. Here are the 9 principles, and today we really touch on all of them except for right plant, right place, which is a separate class on landscape design. And providing for wildlife goes also into the design, but also into how you manage and maintain your landscape. So all of these principles we'll touch on today. Let's talk about landscape maintenance versus gardening. So what we really see as landscape maintenance is it's keeping a landscape healthy and clean, safe, and maybe somewhat attractive. And then it can happen in a garden, in a landscape, in a park, institutional around our buildings here. You will consider what happens there, landscape maintenance. And what we associate with landscape maintenance is very often machines that we're using. Lawnmowers, blowers, hedge clippers, lots of machines, noise, and also some pollution. So this is my association. You might have a different one, but that is something that I think of when I talk about landscape maintenance. So let's bring it to gardening. What's the difference here? So gardening is really something that I think you want to enjoy. You want to be in your garden to see what's going on and to create something that could make something happen. Such as, and we call it vegetable garden, fruit gardens, herb gardens. You might want to have a butterfly garden or just enjoy the working with plants or being around plants and being out in nature, being out there and enjoy what you created and what you also maintain in a certain way, but differently. It's more like gardening maintenance. So let me use that term here, coin that term. So when we talk about landscaping, again, we talk about cultural practices first. You always start out with the right plant in the right place, and you take the right care of these plants. If you start out with that concept, you will be off to a successful landscape with very little, a little bit of maintenance, but not a lot of maintenance, because the plant should be happy where it's at. It has the space to grow into, with the right light conditions, the right moisture conditions, soil conditions. So you have a really good start here. Right plant, right place, right care. Then if you look into the rest of these concepts here, you want to only fertilize as needed. So you always want to ask, when you do something in the landscape, why am I doing it? You need to have a really good reason to do something in the landscape to justify what you are doing. Then irrigation recommendations, you follow those. You use mulch, you prune appropriately, and you address pests responsibly. So these are the concepts for guidelines for a healthy landscape. And you will hear more of that throughout and at the end of the presentation again to reiterate. Okay, let's start out with mowing. Even if you don't mow yourself, these are some concepts that you really want to keep in mind. You never want to mow your grass when it's wet. First of all, it can be dangerous if it's slippery, if it's wet and it's on a slope. Then the grass clippings might clump under your machine and might prevent the machine from running. And then also it can really leave ruts in your landscape and destroy your soil, your whole landscape, if you have the landscape wet and you run your heavy machine on it. And Melissa and I were observing it while we were on the other side of the street doing a yard visit. And they were relentless. It was raining before, it was raining during the site visit, and it was really, really wet in that landscape. The water was almost standing in some areas. And he was just, the lawn guy, he was just relentless. He was just using this heavy machine, and it looked horrible. It looked like some, I don't know, wild hogs went through that yard after he was done. So anyway, don't mow when grass is wet. You want to keep your mower blade sharp, because this gives you a healthy, good cut. And you see it right here. When you have a sharp mower mowing blade, you see you have a clean cut. When it's dull, you rip them up like this here, which means this really is not healthy. You want to have the cut clean, because this dries out quicker. It makes the grass being stressed and more open. It's up for diseases. So clean mowing blades, and also sharp. You always want to mow at the recommended height for the specific species that you have. I mean, some do, most of us, or many of us do have St. Augustine grass. Some might have zoysia, others might have Bahia grass. So you have to look at the recommended height for your specific grass. You don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade or grass blade at one time. The reason being is that you stress your grass by every time you remove the green tissue. And the green tissue is really needed for any plant, including the turf grass, to produce its own food through photosynthesis. So you cut it off and the plant wants to grow back. So in the meantime, the plant never really develops if you remove more than 1/3 for many, many times. The grass will never develop a deep root system. So, and a deep root system, we'll talk about that in a minute, is really crucial for healthy turf grass. You want to increase your mowing height under any environmental stresses, such as shade, drought, and so forth. And then you want to leave the clippings on the ground, not only for that you reintroduce nitrogen, like a little bit of fertilizer to your landscape. It's also for not filling the landfills with grass clippings, and also not getting them down into the storm drain. So leave clippings on the ground. So here are the mowing heights just quickly. Bahia grass 3 to 4 inches, St. Augustine, depending on the variety you have. The standard is 3.5 to 4 inches mowing height, and the dwarf is 2 to 2.5. And then we have the zoysia and the Bermuda. And again, you get these, you get the PowerPoint in PDF, so you can look it up after the fact. And there are also many fact sheets from your IFAS where you can get more into detail, what kind of grass you have, and about all this good stuff, how to mow. Here's the influence of mowing height that you see in this diagram here. So if you have a grass that is kept at the right height and not stressed through dull blades and all that, It will develop a deeper root system, which makes it more resilient to drought and also to pests. So you really are striving for a turf grass with deeper roots. So again, you want to leave the yard clippings in on blow them back on your turf grass and never leave them in the curb, because that could contribute to pollution of our stormwater systems and our water quality. And we don't want to be part of pollution. We want to be part of the solution. So back on the turf grass. Fertilizer. First question, why do you want to apply fertilizers? Is there a reason? If there's no reason, we don't apply fertilizers. So there are some reasons. One could be that you want to promote root and shoot growth. You want to maybe enhance flower or fruit production. You might want to correct nutrient deficiencies. And then I want to get back to the right plant, right place. If you have plants properly placed and established, mature plants should not really need a fertilizer. So what you see here in the middle picture is a rose that's iron deficiency. I would say if you really want to do roses, keep them in a pot where you can control the soil, or keep them in a well, and we talk about that in a minute, that you have really good soil in the whole landscape area in this bed where the roses are, or pick a different plant, because roses don't care for our soils that we have. The same on the right-hand side, the Canary Island date palm, which has a combination of potassium and magnesium deficiency. You see it on the lower leaves there, the lower fronds, which means this palm really cannot cope with that soil either and the environment that it's in. We see these palms a lot, and I would say 95% of the time you see these palms, they have deficiencies, meaning they're either not in the right place, and if they are in this wrong place, at least you need to have a good fertilizer program to keep them, get the nutrients to them. So remember that fertilizer is not plant food. Plants produce their own food through photosynthesis. And also in nature, if you look at plants, if you go in a park, in a state park, or you go into a forest, you don't see plants being fertilized, and they grow without the addition of chemical fertilizers. So we do have also organic matter that is being received from earthworms, insects, bacteria, nematodes, and so forth. These critters help to decompose organic matter. It could be salt, it could be leaves or pine needles, any of that sort, and also, of course, compost. And that's a natural fertilizer, so to speak. It slowly releases nutrients, and it also dissolves minerals. So this is the beauty of using natural fertilizer such as that. Let's talk a moment about soil pH and nutrients. Soil pH is important for you to test in case you put in a new landscape, or your plants don't look really great and you want to get to the bottom of things. pH is the nutrient availability to the plants in the soil. So this is a good measurement to see what kind of pH do I have so that I really pick the right plants for my location, or correct deficiency, that I use the right fertilizer to get these plants up to speed, to look better and healthy, to correct the problem. And here you can see the ideal nutrient uptake. The pH would be between 5.5 and 6.8, so in that range. When you look in Pinellas County, the soil range is between about 6.5 in very ideal circumstances, up to 8 and even up. I saw even 8.5 and 9 pH in Pinellas County. I tested that. So you want to pick plants. Again, if you do a new landscape, implement new plants, you want to really get your pH tested and see what you have. Changing the pH, that is required if you put in, again, specialty gardens such as roses.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, how can I help you? Are you George? Okay, I looked you up by your phone number. So are you just having trouble getting into your account?
Hang on a second. I have somebody else on my line here.
Okay.
Does anybody else hear that?
Yes.
Okay. Who is on the phone? I'm doing a presentation here, so I don't know who you try to reach, but I think you got the wrong person. Can you hear me? Oh, she left. She hung up. Okay. I don't know what that was. Technical
No, I
miracle.
think she muted herself.
Okay.
That's all right.
Got it.
As long as it's
Okay.
quiet.
Okay, good. All right. Let's talk about the changing pH. So for specialty gardens such as veggies, roses, and so forth, you really should have a better soil than what we have to offer here with our sandy soils. What you want to do is you want to replace the entire area. You want to amend the entire planting area, not just a potting hole, put a little bit of soil in the potting hole. You want to really make sure that you do an entire area. So I don't know if it could be 10 by 5 feet, 20 by whatever the area is. You want to know that the effects of amending the soil is not ongoing. You need to do that. You need to keep doing that at least once a year if you want to keep veggies healthy and growing. So this is not a one-time action. So what that means is for a regular, traditional, or ornamental landscape, you really you should not really do that, because you can use the right plant for the right location. You select your plants for your site condition, your pH, and you don't have to amend the soil for that. So right plant, right place comes back into the game here to be successful without amending the soil. So when we talk about fertilization of trees and shrubs, number one is, again, right plant, right place. If the plant is happy where it's at, you don't need to fertilize. If a tree is mature and doesn't show any deficiency, no fertilizer needed. If you do have shrubs that you keep in a specific height, let's say you have a hedge there, you want to remember that if you pruning too, but if you fertilize a plant, it wants to grow. And then you stimulate growth, meaning then you prune it off again. So if you do have a healthy plant and it's too big for the space anyway, don't fertilize it. Okay, when we talk about fertilizing, if you do it, you want to be sure to broadcast it uniformly over the root zone. The root zone of a tree, and also of shrubs, can extend 2 to 3 times out of the canopy. So never ever assume that you fertilize around the trunk of the tree. Or the plant. You want to spread around the canopy of the tree, or the drip line of the tree, and out. So this is where the roots are. If you do use lawn fertilizer on a large area that has the trees and the shrubs within the landscape, you just use one fertilizer that's good for the whole landscape. So that saves you a lot of fertilization, time, and money. Because again, the roots within the grass or the turf area, they take up what's out there. So if it's the turf fertilizer, they take that too. So a good fertilizer for both the turf grass, the shrubs, and the trees, if you decide to fertilize. And then weed and feed is not recommended, because the weed part is an herbicide that can be harmful to your specific plants. So you want to separate the weed part from the feed part. So separate applications for that. And I want to reiterate, if you do have questions, I think I didn't say that before, please put them in the chat. Melissa is monitoring the chat, and then can take the questions at the end. And if you have something really urgent that needs to be addressed immediately, let us know. You can raise your hand and we can do that too. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. All right, moving right along. If you do have reclaimed water, and I would be interested who of you does, so if you could put that in the chat or raise your hand, who of you is using reclaimed water in the landscape? If you do, you've got to keep in mind that the reclaimed water contains nutrients that is beneficial for most plants. Some plants don't like a lot of nitrogen or salt, what's in the reclaimed water, but many plants appreciate that. So anytime you irrigate or you water your landscape, it receives a little bit of fertilization. So you might be able to reduce, you are definitely able to reduce, but you might be even able to eliminate the need of nitrogen applications. There is a really neat map that environmental management, Pinellas County Environmental Management, came up with. So you can look up that map and see where you are. And it gives you how much, or if you need to at all need to apply any nitrogen to your landscape. It's a really neat map that you can utilize and see what your situation is when you are using reclaimed water for irrigation. Okay, let's go to pruning. Same question. Why do we prune? You've got to ask the question, why do I do something in the landscape? Training young plants, control size and form, and I'm getting back to the right plant, right place. If you use the right plant for the right location, with the appropriate mature size in mind, you can reduce or even might be even able to eliminate pruning entirely. Maintain or improve vigor or appearance of a plant, which means removal of dead, dying, or damaged branches. You might influence flower and fruit production if you have fruit trees. Safety, a branch that is hanging over something, property that could fall and damage or hurt people, that would be a reason. Rejuvenation, that's a process, a pruning process that we really need to know what it is. Some people confuse it with cutting a plant down to the ground. That is not considered rejuvenation. And then root pruning, that's to slow plant growth, and it can produce a more compact plant, such as bonsai. You might have seen bonsais before, but this is something you need to really study up on if you want to do that. Okay, tools for pruning. It depends on the job. Most of what we can do as gardeners in our home landscapes depends on the job again, but we can do with hand tools. The hand tools are, you can do much preciser cuts, cleaner cuts, and you also can handle them easier than power tools. So what you see here are some clippers, hedge clippers. You have something here, a lopper for larger, thicker branches or the twigs that you cannot get with this little clipper here. Hand saws, very easy to handle. And then, oops, I'm sorry. And then you do have that pole saw here, which is also great to use if it's a little higher up. And here's the power tool, of course. These are the power tools here on the bottom. These are tools that are needed, but you've got to be careful and need to know what you do and how you're doing it without hurting yourself, without damaging plants as well. So again, most of the jobs we do in our landscapes can be done with hand tools. So some techniques. Pruning shrubs and trees is to, again, remove dead branches, diseased branches, crossing or rubbing branches, out of place branches. And then you want to remember that you want to cut each branch separately. You don't want to get greedy and say, with my clippers, I can do 3 branches at once. I think your tools will not appreciate that, and you won't get a clean, good cut either. Timing. Light pruning can be done anytime. Deadheading of flower heads, dead flowers, spent flowers can be done anytime. Removal of dead branches can also be done anytime. Major pruning, I'm talking about removing maybe a third of a plant size, should not be done after mid-October until approximately mid-March. It depends a little bit on how cold the winter is. What happens if you prune, you stimulate growth in many cases. And if we, let's say, prune in mid-November and we get a cold spell and you stimulated new growth, that plant could be damaged and maybe even go into a decline if it's really hurt by a deep freeze or something like this. So keep that in mind, that pruning timing of pruning, I would say mid-October to mid-March. If it's a really harsh winter, it might be even late March. Techniques, shearing or hedging. You also always see these, or very often you see the hedges being very thick on the top and very thin and leggy on the bottom. So what you want to do is to keep the top narrower and the base wider so that the light can get on the bottom as well and stimulate some growth. You also want to look into reducing pruning of hedges because you stimulate growth every time you prune, and then you might even fertilize, you stimulate new growth, and you cut it off again. At one point, the plant gives up because if it wants to be 20 feet tall, you keep it at 5 feet. that is not a healthy way to maintain a plant that tries to grow into its mature size and is basically prohibited from doing that. So right plant, right place, number one. If you do have a hedge that's 20 years old, it's hard to get back to or go to a wider base to get back to a healthy shape. But if you have a fairly young hedge, that can be still done. I've done it after my plants were about 5, 6 years old when I moved into my house, and I could do it. So it looks really different, but it looks very healthy and thick all throughout. Watering, irrigation. Let's talk about some water facts here. The largest outdoor use of water is irrigation. About 50% and up of total household use is used on irrigation. And if you look at the one watering day for a 2,500 square foot lawn, that covers the domestic water needs for 11 people, which means that we are really using water for non-food crop, which we in the future, and should actually think about that now already, but in the future, we won't have that water available for these types of landscapes. We won't have in 2030, if we keep going on with that tempo, using water in 50% outdoors for a non-food crop, we might get more restrictions. We might get more, what you see in the best part of this country, in the nation, we might have really problems with getting drinking water to locations. So think about using water only as needed, and maybe think about how you use your lawn, how you could maybe do something else. So if you do have an irrigation system, and you might want to put in the chat for me also, who of you does have an irrigation system, an automatic irrigation system? So water, if you look into water waste, is wasted due to improper calibration. That means you have no idea how long it takes to get your 3/4 of an inch of water on your landscape. So you just set it somehow an hour, 2 hours per zone. So you might have to calibrate to find out how long does my system need to run to get the right amount of water that is enough, but not creates runoff. Turf or plant interference, excessive frequency, turf or plant interference, broken sprinkler heads, and misdirected sprinkler heads are all cause of water waste. Water conservation tips in the landscape. You want to adhere to local watering restrictions, that's a given. You want to water in the early morning hours. Irrigate deeply. Here are the 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch to encourage drought resistance. Leaf system off when water is not needed. So you really want to turn it off if it's, let's say, it rained enough, or the landscape is dormant and doesn't need anything. And then turn it on when you see there is an indicator plant, or the turf grass gives you indications of drought, or it's at the point where it really needs a drink before it goes belly up. Install a rain sensor or soil moisture sensor, and ensure if you do have one, it's working. It's actually required by state law since 2009 that you do need to have such device. What you see on the right-hand side, on the upper side is a rain sensor. On the lower side is a soil moisture sensor. There are other devices out there in the meantime, ET controllers that also take into consideration the rainfall. So there are all kinds of great devices out there that can be operated with your phone, your smartphone. But we got to have either of these devices to override the system when it had rained sufficiently. You want to maintain also mulch depth 2 to 3 inches. You want to use rain barrels to collect rainwater. That also helps with reducing stormwater runoff, but it can also help you using this water for all kinds of purposes in your garden. Use a rain gauge, measure the rain and see how much water was you got in your landscape from rainfall. And then, you know, if I had 2 inches, I don't need to irrigate this week. And I remember I talked about the indicator plant when you make a decision when to turn your system back on in case you don't have a rain sensor or soil moisture sensor. You want to look at your landscape as where do I see indications of drought, or when it really starts to look a little different? The leaf blades, when they start to fold, this is a good sign. St. Augustine grass, when the leaf blades fold, when you step on it and the footprint doesn't come up immediately, when it changes to a bluish grayish color, that's another good indicator that the landscape or the grass needs water. If you don't have grass, you have mostly plants. You might have a plant that you are aware of that has droopy leaves as the first. You want to look at it in the evening. If it's still droopy in the morning, then it does need water. And that would be an indication maybe to water your entire landscape. Other tips are consider reducing turf grass where practical. So if you don't really need a lot of turf grass or not everything you have, I mean, if you do have kids or grandchildren or pets and you really need to use grass for playing, sitting, walking, doing something on it, then yes. But if you don't need all that grass that you have, think about reducing it and using something that is more drought tolerant, more like a garden, that you have plants that you can enjoy, attract some wildlife, all that good stuff. You want to use drought tolerant plants. You want to use reclaimed water if it's available, if you have access to it. And you also want to install drip or micro irrigation. And we are thinking, by the way, teaching a micro irrigation class in November. Melissa will be teaching it, so keep an eye open on our classes that we offer on a regular basis. And you might be interested in learning about micro irrigation. Other watering recommendations for plant establishment are that you want to water thoroughly after planting. You want to keep the root ball moist, but not wet. But the moisture should be constant. You shouldn't let it dry out in between. You don't want to keep it saturated, but moist. Establishment period can vary. Trees, it can be depending on the trunk inch diameter. 6 to 12 months it could take, depending on the size of the tree and the type of tree. It can take up to 2 years, depending. Shrubs and ground covers can take, again, depends on the shrub and the size of the plant, can take up to a few months to a year. And turf grass, usually 30 days. So these are ballpark figures for you so that you know. After establishment, water as needed, and not because it's on a schedule, because this is not the way to water. It really should only be watered again as needed. Timing for plant installation and establishment. Ideally, you have all your plants ready. You know what you want to do. You've got through your landscape design. You know what plants you want to put in. You know where to put them, all that. You want to install the plants shortly before or during the rainy season. So you have everything in place and you can make use of the rainfall by installing them before or during the rainy season. There are exceptions. Seasonal annuals, they can be installed anytime because you have basically at least 3 seasons exchanging annuals. We have the winter annuals that are coming up. We have spring, and then we have summer is tough for many annuals, but there are some perennials you can replace them with. But this is an exception. This is when you want to plant them per season. Let's talk about integrated pest management, IPM. That's a fancy title for something that is really very basic, just being a good gardener and observe what you have in your landscape in a nutshell. So what is integrated pest management? It's emphasizing the use of pest-resistant plants. And again, right plant, right place. Proper landscape management. You want to make sure that the plants are spaced enough that from the foundation, that they do have airflow around them that will reduce pests on your plants. Proper landscape management. Encourage beneficial insects and use least toxic pesticides if you do have to use them. And then the key really to IPM is that you are routinely walking your yard and looking at your plants and see what's going on. If you see any changes and detect it in the early stages. That could be leaves rolling up, something crawling around, anything that is different from, let's say, a few days or a week before. So if you are a good gardener, you know your plants and you can see if something has changed. And then you want to be the detective and find out what it is and then take action after you do know that. So again, pesticides are used only on affected plants and as a last resort. So you don't do broadcast applications to blanket cover your whole landscape with your pesticide. There is this pyramid that really shows nicely that you do have different options here. You go from proactive to reactive. So we do have the cultural practices first, which is the plant selection for the site and proper spacing, proper establishment, all that. Then we do have the physical mechanical, which is removal of bugs. You can also use traps, barriers. You can wash them off, the insects. You can prune them off with sterile tools. That's also a mechanical tool to use tools, but you want to keep them clean so that you don't spread the disease. Biological, and then we have chemical, and then at the very top, we do have the hard chemical, which includes the soaps and the oils, but this also is considered soft chemicals because they are easier on the environment. The hard chemicals are direct toxins, kills on contact, by ingestion or fumigation or broad spectrum. I also want to remind everybody, if you use hard chemicals, if it kills a little bug and you keep using something in the long term, it can also affect pets. It can affect also kids, children, and also people. So you want to really be sure that if you use a hard chemical, that you follow label instructions and that you really only use as needed. This is the last resort. So I really make sure that you really go through all these motions here before you go to the hard chemical. Ways to spot pest problems is, as I said before, sooty mold, that dark layer or whatever it is, this stuff that's on the leaves. That's an indicator of past or present pests. If you see ants crawling around, they might be the second generation of feeding on something. Plant damage, you see holes or you see something that is damaged. Identifying the insects, you might want to see if you have any good ones crawling around. And then you, of course, can contact your IFAS County Extension Office here in Pinellas County, depending where you live, but this would be your next one. We also have the Lawn and Garden Help Desk up in Palm Harbor once a week. Our master gardeners are maintaining that and staffing that. So before you really take action, you don't know what it is, you need help with identifying a problem. It doesn't need to be an insect, can be anything else, could be a fungus or whatever it is. Please share with our extension horticulturists and they help you identify the problem. Then all bugs are not bad bugs. All these critters we have crawling around are not necessarily harming our landscape. Less than 1% of our insects that you see are considered pests or problems. Beneficials naturally help keep pests under control. So if you do not blanket spray everything, if you just do spot treatment, you do have your food web intact, your little ecosystem is healthy, and the beneficial insects don't get affected by pesticides and can take care of the bad guys. Also, think about the food web as of birds needing bugs to feed on. They need protein to feed their young, especially, but they also need to feed themselves with bugs. So this is kind of this looking at the big picture here. And what I said before, that incorrect use of pesticides cannot only harm little bugs, they can also harm people, pets, and beneficial organisms and the environment. So some pest management strategies to avoid pest problems, that's always the best thing, prevention. Use pest-resistant plants, place plants where they are happy. If they want to be in the sun, they should be in the sun, not in the shade, and vice versa. As an example, go easy on water and fertilizer because you stimulate new growth. Water early in the morning, and you mow and prune correctly so that plants can stay healthy. Why tolerate damage? It's not a perfect world. We know that. No one can maintain an insect and disease-free landscape. It is not possible. Even if you blanket cover your entire landscape, at one point, these pesticides will degrade and not be there anymore, but you might have a sterile environment because the bugs gave up or they are not there anymore. They don't find anything to feed on. A little damage won't hurt your plants. Most plants are very resilient. And just remember the milkweed. We plant milkweed for the milkweed caterpillars to feed on. And don't they look awful after the milkweed is really stripped? You go, oh my goodness, this poor plant. They grow back. It may take a little, but most of the time, plants are resilient and come back. And again, beneficial insects need pest insects for food. Learn to recognize the helpers. You might see some of them in your yard, and there are many ugly guys out there, but ugly doesn't mean they are bad. The damselfly, leaf-footed bug, the syrphid fly, just to name a few. Then you have the green lacewing, the earwig, and you do have the lady beetle and the lady beetle larvae, and they all feed on other insects and keep your landscape in check. So if you see these around, you are good to go. There are many, many, many more, of course. I just named or listed a few here. So there are whole decks of, I have a little deck here. It's called Helpful, Harmful, or Harmless. It's a deck, and you can see great pictures, and they explain exactly what they feed on, from wasps to spiders. Believe it or not, spiders are also beneficial, at least some of them. So learn to recognize these guys. Oops, sorry. I did not. Now, so again, hand picking, pruning, spraying with stream of water, beneficial insects and organisms, use mechanical pesticides, insecticidal herbs, and horticultural oils. That is the key. And you might be thinking, gosh, he's speaking so much about all this pest management, but it really is so crucial that we don't pollute if it's not necessary, and really take advantage of natural predators who help us keep the pests under control. Mulch. That's a happy girl right there. Lots of mulch to distribute. Any material applied to the soil surface to protect or improve the area covered is considered mulch. When we talk about organic mulches, we talk about plant derived. So anything that is from a plant is considered organic. Anything inorganic would be considered rocks or rubber mulch. Anything like rocks, shells, any like that would be considered inorganic. So to help the plants, you really want to use organic mulch. It prevents loss of water from soil by evaporation. It helps suppress weeds. It moderates the soil temperature. And remember, we do have cold, we have heat, we have all kinds of different temperatures here. And that helps to moderate the soil temperature, what plant roots really prefer. So you want to have, for that reason, mulch also. Supplies nutrients slowly. Once it breaks down, you get organic mulches, you get really good soil over time. And you also improve your soil structure with organic mulches. Like the compost, this is nothing you want to do one time. That needs to be done depending on the mulch, how quickly it breaks down, at least once a year. So depending on the mulch, it's a repetitive garden chore. Types of mulches, any is good except for the cypress. That is not really a good mulch and not recommended to use because it's not a byproduct of the lumber industry anymore. It is harvested from wetlands, and for that reason, it's not really recommended to use. We need them in the wetlands, these trees, and not shredded up as mulch. Anything else is good. If you do have leaves, please use them. Recycle your yard waste. If you have any clippings that are small enough to use as in the compost, or use them even under your landscape beds. Oak leaves, another good one. Pine needles, just use them. If you do have oak leaves, use them. And people say, that looks so ugly. You can top dress them with a nicer mulch, a woody mulch, but as a ground layer for getting good soil, oak leaves are fabulous. And then, of course, we have the recycled yard waste from the county and the city. They both, city of St. Pete, they both offer that, and take advantage of that as well. This is great mulch too. Composting. So when we talk about recycling in a Florida-friendly landscape, it includes recycling the grass clippings, like I mentioned earlier. Use fallen leaves and pine needles as mulch under trees and shrubs. What we really like to see are self-mulching areas under trees. If you cannot plant anything because you have a dense root system and a lot of shade, use your leaves and your pine needles as natural mulch under your trees. Create self-mulching areas, maintain a compost pile with kitchen scraps. That's another one that we consider recycling. Create a compost, have a compost pile or a compost bin. Benefits of compost in the landscape: it improves the soil tilth and the structure, increases water and nutrient holding ability. It saves you money by using less fertilizer and water. And it helps return organic materials to the soil and keeps them out of landfills and out of our water sources. And last, supports our living organisms that I mentioned before that help breaking down these mulches and this compost. What can be composted? Anything that was once a plant, in a nutshell. So this is not a full compost class apparently, but just if you're interested in composting, there are great fact sheets out there. And eventually, again, keep an eye on our calendar. Florida-friendly landscaping classes. We also will teach a compost class in the future. Timing of recycling, mulching, and composting. You can do that anytime. Guidelines for a healthy landscape. I'm getting back to the cultural practices, starting out with the right plant, right place, right care. Fertilize only as needed and at the correct time and the rate. Follow irrigation recommendations. Use mulch, prune properly, address pests responsibly. This is really the bulk here. If you remember that, if you start out with the right plant in the right place, you don't have to pamper a plant too much. If you're really in love with a plant, let's say you really like a gardenia and it wouldn't grow in your soil pH, again, put it in a pot and pamper it that way. It would be easier than having in the middle of your landscape where it needs all the attention, surrounded by plants that don't need all that attention, as of water, as of fertilizer, as of all that. So right plant, right place is really the best way to start out with a healthy landscape. Even if you don't have the situation where you start from new, but if you add plants to your landscape, do a little bit of homework or join us at one of our design classes, landscape design classes, where we talk extensively about how to find the right plants for the right places. Okay, and with that, do we have any questions?
We have no questions as of yet. So just a reminder, you can put your question in the chat. Since we're at the end, I think we could open it up if you want to ask your question out loud.
Okay.
Do it that way as well. So got different options. If you don't want to speak up, go ahead and put it in the chat because we're looking at that as well.
Okay. Do you have any questions, Melissa?
Oh man, putting me on the spot.
So how many do we have here with irrigation systems? Did any put that in there?
I had one say that they had an irrigation system. Deep well irrigation.
Okay. So I talk a lot about irrigation, but some of our homes don't have irrigation, especially the older homes in Pinellas County. But I see more and more people putting one in if they don't have one. So I'm surprised it's just one out of the 16.
I have a couple more people chiming in now saying that they do have irrigation systems as well.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question. Where can we get soil pH tested?
Okay. There are different options. The one is that you go to the University of Florida in Gainesville, and we will add that to our resources information sheet. There is a form that you fill out. So you can, it's $3 for pH testing per test, and you ship it to the University of Florida. On that form, you get the instructions. It's very easy. You just get the soil, put it in a Ziploc bag, needs to be dry, and then you ship it to Gainesville and they give you the results, usually within not even 2 weeks. So it's a really quick turnaround. The other option is that you take it to a local nursery. Some of them do provide that service. And there are also some test kits out there. If you go to the big box stores, they might not be as accurate, but it gives you at least some idea. So these are your options really. And I heard, I don't know if it's true, but I heard that some of the pool companies, pool supply companies, they also test for pH. I don't know if they do pH for soil as well, but might be worthwhile asking if you do have a pool service. Okay, any other questions?
Nope, not yet.
Okay,
Quiet group today.
okay. Well, we do have our contact information also. We provide that. We'll get that to Jane, and Jane will forward it to you. So if you have questions after the fact, please feel free to contact us. And we also will provide the information for the Lawn and Garden Help Desk here at the Extension Office in Largo. So this is also available to you by email, by phone, and also you can also walk in if you have the time during the week. So there are great resources for you that you can tap into.
Wonderful. I've also put in the chat the link for all of the other gardening webinars that between Doris, Melissa, and Teresa Badarek from IFAS Extension as well have offered everything from growing vegetables in containers to getting ready for fall planting, which that class is best viewed before fall. But some of the basics that Doris has talked about can really be kind of expanded on in the introduction to Florida-friendly landscaping and pollinator gardening as well. So those are all recorded and available if you jump to the link that I put in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, with that, if there's no more questions, I thank you very much for attending and listening. And I hope to see you soon. And we'll see Melissa soon. So that will be a fun class in November, right? Next month.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. With that, have a great rest of your day and see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.